With the latest update of Limbus Company, we have received yet another third kindred Bloodfiend to aid us in combat. Much to a lot of people's dismay, the identity I'm talking about is not Dulcinea Rhoda, but instead Priest Gregor. Priest Gregor is a character with a bunch of very interesting mechanics and design choices that differentiate him from the other IDs at our disposal. And in today's video I want to go over what he can do and whether he's any good at what he does. You might remember me as the person who called Barber Outis bad not too long ago. So don't expect me to go easy on Gregor, but he's definitely a more promising character than whatever Outis was. But is he strong enough to make the cut to be part of the Bleed team? You'll have to watch until the end to find out. Before I start, I have to mention that, as per usual, a lot of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed. So if you find yourself coming back to my content, you should definitely consider pressing that subscribe button, and maybe turning the notifications on as well. Subscribing helps me out a lot, and takes just a second of your time. Without further ado, it's time to review Gregor. Let's start by addressing the fact that Priest Gregor is designed to fit a very unique niche in our roster. All identities in Limbus Company fall into one of two categories. They're either a generalist or a specialist. Generalists are the identities that don't rely on their teammates to increase their own power. These are your Tintin Honglus, N-Corp Sinclairs, R-Corp Heathcliffs, and so on. These characters can be put into any team and perform in the exact same way, as their power does not rely on things like effect stacks, which makes them more versatile. Specialists, on the other hand, are often stronger than generalists, but only on one team. They require outside help in the form of buffs and effect stacking in order to perform well. Most good teams in Limbus Company are comprised of 6 specialists, all working together to increase each other's power. The first notable exception to this rule was the release of Ringy Sung, who can perform well in a multitude of teams, due to his ability to inflict random debuffs with his coins. This came at the cost of being inconsistent, forcing Yi Sang to only be used in teams without a powerful 6 specialist, or teams that enjoy his over-reliance on count infliction and have additional synergies going on with the sinner himself. Priest Gregor, however, aims to be part of 2 teams at once, making him the first multi-team specialist by design. His abilities interact with 2 effects in particular, Bleed and Rupture, the 2 signatures of Canto 7. However, sadly, I believe Gregor can only really show himself in Bleed, as his kit has too many flaws to outperform even a very dated 2-star in his Rosespanner Workshop identity in terms of Rupture. Before I start telling you why I like Gregor in Bleed, let me tell you why he doesn't work in Rupture first. The first and most obvious problem of his kit is that he lacks Rupture count infliction. The only skill that inflicts Rupture count is his skill 3, the rarest one. If you don't want to absolutely butcher your stack, Gregor will have to block for like 80% of the fight, which obviously adds little to no value to your team. In terms of potency infliction, Gregor offers very little as well. He can inflict OK potency when given Blooded Hands 3, but otherwise his minimal potency infliction is absolutely not enough to justify the heavy count cost. The one thing he does provide is a Gluttony skill 1, which can help out with Talisman infliction through Red Sheet Sinclair's passive. However, that can be said about literally any identity with a Gluttony skill 1, so this does not help Gregor at all. The final unforgivable sin of Priest Gregor in Rupture is his lack of a Gloom skill. If you're confused on why that's a problem, it's due to his AEDD Eagle skill. That skill inflicts an effect called Spark Discharge, which allows any Gloom skill to inflict 1 Rupture count whenever it hits. This effect is incredibly powerful, as it allows count negative skills to go neutral or even positive as long as they have the Gloom affinity, and is the thing that really makes Rosespanner Gregor work. Not only does Priest Gregor lack a Gloom skill to use Spark Discharge, but he also lacks an Envy skill to fuel the Eagle as well. Overall, Gregor lacks any kind of value or synergy needed to be useful for Rupture, which is why he is a terrible pick for the team, especially when another Gregor identity has been an important part of the team for over a year now. Now that we're done with the absolute failure that is Priest Gregor in Rupture, let's take a look at him through the lens of Bleed, and figure out if he's any better in that team, considering that his skills feature a lot more Bleed than they do Rupture. Gregor's first skill has 3 base power and 2 coins with 4 coin power. Against targets with 12 bleed, it clashes at 15 power, making this skill an actually good option for clashing whenever you have nothing else. It draws aggro to Gregor next turn and inflicts him with 10 bleed on use, with 15 bleed on top of that if Gregor's HP is above 50%. The coins of the skill inflict a total of 2 bleed and 1 rupture, and Gregor gets 3 stacks of bloodied hand. We'll get to this effect as soon as I go over all of his skills. Gregor's second skill has a base power of 4 and 2 coins with a coin power of 6. With its conditionals active, Suffocating Guilt clashes at 20 power against enemies with 12 bleed. This is powerful but also notable, as it not only blows the skill to average of 16 out of the water, but also beats out the new Uptie 4 conditional clash power average of 19 by 1, making this skill better at clashing than others while not requiring any unique conditions. Gregor's skill 2 also draws aggro to him and inflicts him with 10 bleed much like his skill 1. The skill inflicts 10 additional bleed and 3 bloodied hand as long as Gregor is at less than 5 ailing heart. If he is at 5 or more, the skill instead consumes up to 6 bloodfist, converting it to bloodied hand at the rate of 6 to 1. I will explain ailing heart later as well. The coins of this skill very simply inflict 2 bleed count and 1 rupture, as well as granting Gregor 3 stacks of bloodied hand. The rupture infliction is pretty much non-existent, but 2 bleed count is a nice addition to a high clash power skill that's designed to set Gregor up for more powerful skills later. Gregor's third skill, the Unforgivable Sin, is a blunt last 3 coin skill with 5 base power and 4 coin power, which exactly mirrors the base stats of Rupture's Skullbuster. And just like that skill, the Unforgivable Sin has a bunch of effects, so stay with me now. 50% of the damage Gregor does with the skill he heals as HP. The healing caps out at 100 per skill, meaning you can heal more than that if you use 2 or more in a single turn. The Unforgivable Sin does more damage if Gregor is at low HP, dealing 1.5% more damage per 1% of missing HP. This additional damage caps out at 90%, meaning that Gregor has to drop down to 40% HP to max out this effect. The coin power of the skill is also increased by 1 against targets with 6 or more bleed. On use, this skill consumes all of Gregor's bloodied hand stacks above 10, and heals Gregor for 3 times the consumed stacks HP. If the skill consumed 10 stacks or more, the coin power of the skill rises by 1 more. If the skill consumed 20, then the final coin of the skill gets reused. Gregor also gains 10 bleed when using this skill, and after the attack he heals 10% of his HP, so 27 at level 50. The coins of the skill don't have any damage shenanigans going on, as they simply help Gregor's necessary stacks. The first coin gives Gregor 3 bloodied hand, the second one inflicts 2 bleed and rupture count, and the third coin, which is the one that can be reused, inflicts 2 bleed and rupture potency. This skill is really good. But before I start glazing my boy Gregor, let me finish going over his defensive skill and passive ability. Greg's defensive skill is a last block with 15 base and 5 coin power. At combat start, if Priest Gregor is at 40% HP or higher, this skill inflicts him with 5 bleed and activates bleed on him up to 3 times. If Gregor is at less than 40% HP, he instead consumes up to 20 bloodfist and converts it to an equal amount of healing on himself. This skill also gives Gregor 3 stacks of ailing heart, which helps reach his second skill's breakpoint. As for passives, Gregor shares the same Bloodfiend passive as all of his family members, and adds the Bloodfist mechanic to the encounter. Gregor's real passive though is Self-Destructive Dedication. It activates at 5 last resources owned, and its main effect is that every turn end Gregor heals 10 minus ailing heart SP for the ally with the least SP. Notably, this effect does not work on Gregor himself, hence the self-destructive part. The passive secondary effect is that Gregor can cheat death once per fight, by nullifying lethal damage and refusing to go below 1 HP for the turn when this procs. The Priest's support passive is also pretty good, as it's a 3 last resonance passive that allows the ally with the least HP to heal 3 HP on hit up to 3 times per turn, healing 3 more HP per hit if the target had bleed. Now that I've read out all of the skills of Gregor so you don't have to, we can start actually rating how well he performs in Bleed. And the first thing I want to bring attention to is the ungodly amount of health this identity has. Priest Gregor sits at 279 HP, which is an insane health pool to have. If damage dealing identities usually hover just under 200 HP, Gregor is just under 300. By the way, that is absolutely the highest HP identity in the game, with only Anchor Mersault coming close at 270. And we all know how much Mersault has to sacrifice for that health pool. Even the fairly new Swai Ishmael, who is a tank by nature with her huge amount of self-aggro, only has 254 HP at level 50, which goes to show just how tanky Gregor can be. I say can be, because much like everything in Canto 7, this health pool is bait. Which brings me to the first role Gregor fills in the Bleed team, being a bloodfist bank. The large amount of health Gregor has is constantly being chipped down by the bleed he inflicts on himself. At the start of a fight, Gregor's first and second skills inflict 25 and 20 bleed on him respectively. This takes away a large amount of Gregor's HP very quickly, but in return, you get access to high amounts of bloodfist much earlier than usual. Does this make Barber Outis better? No, not at all, Ring is still stronger. But this does give Gregor a distinct role that will become more important as we get more bloodfist identities, namely the villain AD for Dawn, who I expect to be a bloodfist damage machine. This is also why I want to explain the two new effects Gregor brings to the table: Blooded Hand and Ailing Heart. Blooded Hand is an effect that is very similar in nature to Blood-Tinged Scissor Blades of Barber Outis. At 10 stacks, it turns into Blooded Hand 2, and at 20 stacks it turns into Blooded Hand 3. Blooded Hand 2 grants Gregor offense level up based on the stack, which further aids his high clash power in making him a reliable clasher. Blooded Hand 3 keeps that effect, but also makes Gregor inflict 1 Rupture and 1 Bleed whenever he hits an enemy with his skills. If you manage to get this effect to its third stage, you can turn Gregor into a pretty powerful bleed machine, as not only will he provide plenty bloodfist through bleed on himself, but he will also inflict a lot of bleed potency against anyone he hits, as long as you don't consume the stacks. However, even at its second stage, this effect is really powerful, as it's straight up better than Outis' unique effect because it lacks any downsides, and granting an above average clasher additional clash power ends in what we call win rate gaming. Ailing Heart is Gregor's second unique effect, and this one also stacks up to 10, with Gregor gaining 1 stack at every turn end. The Priest gains 1 defense level up per 3 stacks, and he gains 1 more if he's at less than 50% HP. If he is at less than 40% HP, whenever he hits an enemy with any base skill, Gregor heals for 5 times Ailing Heart percent of the damage dealt, with a cap of 30 HP healed per skill. The effect itself is pretty simple, but it acts as a timer, which marks Gregor's shift to the second phase of his kit. When Gregor is at a low amount of Ailing Heart, he acts as a support, giving up his own health to give others Bloodfist, refusing to consume Bloodfist with his skills and healing allies for significant amounts of SP every turn with his passive. However, at turn 6, or earlier if you've used his block, Gregor enters the individualist part of his kit, as by the time that turn comes, his HP has likely dropped down to where his first skill generates much less Bloodfist. His second skill also consumes Bloodfist instead of generating it, and Gregor can finally quickly increase his stacks of Blooded Hand. But really, it's all leading up to just one thing. His second skill increases his Blooded Hand stacks, and Ailing Heart refuses to heal him while he's above 40% HP. Do you know what greatly benefits from Gregor having 30 stacks of Blooded Hand and less than 40% HP? That's right, his third skill, the Unforgivable Sin. I want to take a look at the skill and what it can do at its peak performance, as you're mainly picking Gregor for that huge number if you want to run him. With the aforementioned setup, as well as an enemy with 6 bleed, this skill has a base power of 5 and 3 coins with a coin power of 6. With the maximum effect from the skill's damage increase and without taking offense level difference into consideration, the Unforgivable Sin deals a total of 152 damage into a neutral target. Of course, that damage is further increased by the offense level of the skill and the offense level up effects granted by Bloodied Hand, but that increase depends on who you're going up against. Notably, as it is a last skill, Gregor's skill 3 will often be used as part of a resonance chain, which further increases its damage output, and it's also affected by Anchor Faust's Gaze, which provides a 20% damage increase on top of that. Overall, this skill can do some crazy damage, especially against last or blunt weak enemies, and when Gregor hits an enemy that's weak to both, let's just say he looks like the second coming of Red Eyes Hiroshima. On top of all this, the Unforgivable Sin heals Gregor for up to 187 HP, meaning once you go all out with the skill, Gregor is back to being a reliable blood bank to the rest of his Bloodfiend friends. To finish up my review of Priest Gregor, I have to say that he's a solid identity. He's mono blunt, which makes him a bad pick for Pierce Rushdown, which is something bleed teams can do well, but when you're not picking bleed just for the pierce damage, Gregor can put in some work. His clash power is fantastic, and that coupled with his aggro perfectly supports weaker bleed inflictors like Ring Outis, who would otherwise run a risk of losing an important clash while she is at low SP. Speaking of SP, Gregor's ability to heal SP off of last resources is second only to Anchor Faust, and with both of them plus Rep Ratio and Ring-Sang on the team, bleed gets to 45 SP across the board much earlier than literally any other team, which makes it awesome for clearing 0 SP content. The damage output of this man is also pretty crazy, but only with his third skill. It hits like a truck, but pretty rarely, so he's not strong enough to contest Rosha for the spot of the best blunt damage dealer in bleed, but he's a very solid backup dancer to her performance, with even the ability to outshine her sometimes when his setup hits just right. The bleed infliction aspect of this identity might not be out of this world, but Gregor's bleed is more than enough when he's put into a team with Ring-Sang, Ring Outis, Anchor Faust and Hook Hun Lu. Overall, the Priest of La Mancha Gregor is a powerful bleed identity that supports Bloodfiends on your team, while also filling the roles of a tank and a blunt damage dealer at the same time. I consider him worthy of being put into the 6th slot of the bleed team whenever you're not facing a pierce weak enemy, as his supportive capabilities coupled with his late game damage output make him a better choice than most when using the bleed team against any kind of content. And if you are facing a pierce weak enemy, Gregor can chill on the bench and help out passively by providing his team with on-hit HP healing as long as you keep up your last resonance. And this brings me to the end of my Priest Gregor review. If you disagree or have something to add, feel free to leave a comment down below, and I will make sure to read it and respond. If you enjoyed the video at any point, leave a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, this was Ultranon, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye!